is Professor Jeffrey Sigalet. I'm an assistant prof of political science here at UBCO, and it is my great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today, Dr. Richard Jordan, all the way from Texas, Waco, Texas, at Baylor University. If you're wondering about us wearing the same suit, I pulled up this morning to pick him up and burst out laughing because the last time I saw him was at my wedding when he was wearing that suit as one of my groomsmen. So we did not plan it, but it's just funnier that way too. And so I should just say a few words of introduction about our guest. Dr. Jordan is a professor of political science and international relations at an associate professor at Baylor University's Department of Political Science. He, before being at Baylor, he works on international relations and game theory. So you might have been at our earlier talk today about game theory. I thought it was fantastic, and hopefully we'll be able to post it on our UBC PPE webpage if Dr. Jordan approves. And no one will see that if he doesn't approve it because he won't approve of this one either. But and before coming to Baylor, he was a graduate student at Princeton University, where we met as two sniveling grad students, and he wrote his dissertation on game theoretical analyses of international relations and war, and prior to that earned his BA at William and Mary, and he's a proud Virginian from farm country in Central Virginia. And yeah, I don't think there's anything else to add. Yeah. Yes, I think so. Yes. Yeah, I think so. Do you want to come make sure?
We'll find out.
I can't. I think we're good. All right. Please join me in giving a big UBCO warm welcome to Dr. Jordan.
All right, good afternoon. I appreciate that introduction. I do apologize for the matching suits. That really was not planned. It was a little bit embarrassing. I have not seen Gladiator 2, so if you want to, during the Q&A, tell me whether or not I should. I see some heads shaking already, but if you want to make a pitch for it or against it, I'd love to hear why I should or should not watch it. This is about Gladiator and the dream of Rome. Quick outline of where we're going today. There's no game theory, don't worry, not a single equation in all of this. I want to make 4 points. First, I'm going to start with the general philosophy of fiction of why should we study Gladiator and movies like it. And I think this might be the most controversial part of the presentation, of what deserves our respect and what lessons can we learn from fiction and when can we learn them. Then I'll dive into Gladiator more specifically, talking about citizenship and Roman success. How did Rome's expansive notion of citizenship drive its conquest of the Mediterranean? And I think Gladiator is good at capturing that. And then I'll turn to the question of what is Rome? And if you've seen Gladiator, which probably most of you have if you're here, Gladiator gives a pretty firm answer to that. What is Rome? Rome is a dream. So that's what we'll be turning into that section of the presentation. And then finally, I want to talk about Gladiator and how it bears on our modern political struggles and battles. Because both the screenwriter, the first screenwriter, David Franzoni, and the director, Ridley Scott, all said this is a movie about, quote, our culture. It is about our culture. So yes, it's about ancient Rome, but they're really using it as a vehicle to talk about the modern West. So what should we take out of that? All right, and for the first time in my life, in 10 years or whatever, I'm on social media. I started a Substack. I have like 20 followers. You too can be you could be the 21st if you want. So that's there. And this is from an edited volume in which Dr. Craig is also part. So if you're interested in the politics of film and what it can tell us about modern life, you can pay too much money from that for Lexington books. All right, without further ado, Gladiator. Why study fiction, whether that be novels or film or plays or video games? The first answer is that, well, fiction provides us data about the societies that consume it, from which it's taken. So for instance, maybe it tells us something that lots of Americans and Canadians like Game of Thrones. This is a pretty uncompelling reason to study fiction. Even the most popular TV shows like Game of Thrones usually only numbers in the small tens of millions of viewers in the United States, so a very small fraction of the population. The most popular TV show, of course, is not fiction, it's the Super Bowl, but even that only gets a third of the American population watching it. So TV shows are not a great way to access How can we learn about the society? Because not enough people are watching them or reading them. So it's another reason to study fiction. Well, fiction also will train you in empathy and theory of mind. And there's been some good work in great journals like Science showing that the more you read fiction, the more it improves your ability to get inside somebody else's head and see the world from their point of view. Now, that's a lovely reason to assign fiction. Go forth and read Jane Austen. You'll become more empathetic. But it's not a great reason for studying it in the classroom. Your teacher just says, go forth and become more empathetic by reading fiction. But what do you want to talk about after you've read it? That brings us to a third reason to study fiction. Fiction tends to inform and distort people's judgments. This is a rather ridiculous headline from the Daily Mail about how Ronald Reagan based his foreign policy on Tom Clancy novels. That's exaggerated, but there actually has been research that tries to show that the Ronald Reagan administration was deeply influenced by Tom Clancy novels and Tom Clancy movies, and that sort of determined what they thought, how they thought nuclear weapons worked. The problem here, though, is yes, fiction can distort your judgment, but that would imply that we can't really learn from fiction. If fiction is distorting your judgment, then it's wrong. What if we want to turn to fiction as a source of wisdom? What can it teach us about the real world? And I think that's the real use, at least the real philosophical reason to dive into fiction, to discuss it with your peers or in a classroom. What can it tell us about our societies today or about human nature? And Aristotle says the same thing. Aristotle says that fiction is much more important, a much more serious matter than history. No offense, there are no history professors in the room, so they can't be offended. There's one. Oh, hello. No offense. Aristotle says you should study fiction even more than you should study history. Why? Because history is hopelessly contingent. Lots of improbable and weird things happen in history. But in fiction, if lots of improbable things start piling up on each other, you check out. You're like, that wouldn't really happen, and you throw the book aside, or you stop watching the movie, or you give up on the TV show. Like, I'm not buying anymore. That show has jumped the shark. So fiction actually has to cleave closer to reality in some ways than reality itself has to. Fiction can't be too improbable. It can't be too outrageous. And so we can learn from it. At least we can learn from good fiction. But how do we tell the good from the bad? Which works of fiction are good enough that they can teach us about politics or about life more generally? Well, the first and readiest answer we have to this question is, well, maybe works of genius are worth exploring. Why read Shakespeare? Because Shakespeare was a genius. Why read George Eliot? George Eliot was a genius. Why watch The Godfather? Francis Ford Coppola was a genius. Francis Ford Coppola was a genius. And The Godfather is full of great insights into human nature. Francis Ford Coppola also made Megalopolis, which is a mega failure. I think the only thing you can learn from that movie is about Francis Ford Coppola's ego. So turning to genius as a reason to study fiction isn't going to do it. It's not a good enough reason to study something. Well, should we just trust elite judgment? The fiction, the novels, the movies that win awards. Here's a list of the best picture winners from the past 10 years. I probably could make a case for Oppenheimer there, but most of these movies have already passed into oblivion. I mean, I don't even know what Nomadland is. How much can we really learn from these texts as well? Elites have their blind spots just like the general public and aren't usually the best guides either as to what we should study. So what should we study? What should we trust? What fiction is worth our attention? Why should we trust it has lessons to teach us? Let me turn to Edmund Burke. Edmund Burke, in Defending Tradition, says the individual is foolish, but the species is wise. And when time is given to it, as a species, it almost always acts right. So the individual, no matter how smart, no matter how much of a genius, the individual is still an individual and is still ultimately going to be a bit foolish and have lots of blind spots. There's no individual you should really trust with enormous amounts of confidence. But the species, when you give it time, usually judges rightly of what's good from bad. And Gladiator itself is a great example of this. When Gladiator came out in 2000, it was the second highest grossing movie of the year behind Mission Impossible 2. It grossed $460 million. Gladiator grossed, Mission Impossible grossed over $500 million. Incidentally, this was pretty spectacular at the time as well. Do y'all have like PG-13 and R-rated in Canada? Is that a thing? Okay. So back in 2000, theaters were still pretty strict about who could go to an R-rated movie. So the fact that an R-rated movie made so much money was pretty impressive in its own right. You still had to be accompanied by an adult if you were under 17 to go to those sorts of films. So it's still just number 2, behind Mission Impossible. However, if you look at, both of them were on Netflix at the fall of 2023. In the fall of 2023 on Netflix, Gladiator was watched for 14 million hours, whereas Mission Impossible 2 was watched for only 2 million. That put Gladiator comfortably in the top 10% of all TV shows, of all TV series and movies. So that means Gladiator is even beating out a whole series that have like 20, 30 hours to watch. Why? Just because it's so high quality. People keep watching it. Whereas by 2023, we've all kind of realized that Mission Impossible 2 was a really bad movie. And nobody's watching it anymore. And that despite the fact that a Mission Impossible movie actually comes out in 2023. So people have a reason to go back and rewatch this movie, but they're not doing it because it's just not worth their attention. The species is wise when you give it time. So what should we trust? I submit to you, and I said this would be the more controversial part, we should trust widely and enduringly popular stories. They need to be enduring because you need time for reflection, not a flash in the pan or a period piece. And they need to have wide appeal because that means they're vetted by many different kinds of audiences. Elites and normies, rustics and urbanites, different kinds of people all saying like, this makes sense, or no, this doesn't make sense. So that's the kind of movie I think that we should consult to try to find political wisdom, and why I thought it would be worthwhile to give a talk on Gladiator. Thanks for inviting me. Let me turn to Gladiator. Gladiator is a great depiction of the success of Rome driven by its wide notion of citizenship. If you've studied much of ancient history, you know that most people live in squalor and poverty and slavery in the ancient world. It's a pretty bad time to be alive. There are exceptions. So the Greeks, of course, develop a notion of citizenship in places like Athens, but it's a fairly narrow idea of citizenship. To the polis, to your city, to your immediate neighbors. It's really the Romans who get a more expansive idea of citizenship off the ground. The natio, this is where we get the word nation. But nation actually is not doing the Romans credit. It's an even more expansive idea than nationhood. It's an almost cosmopolitan notion of citizenship. Anyone can be a Roman. So in the movie, Maximus is not Italian, he's a Spaniard. In fact, he's never been to Rome. And nonetheless, Maximus can be a Roman citizen. Why? Because anyone can be a Roman citizen. You know your New Testament. Paul is a Jew from Tarsus, and yet Paul can be a Roman citizen. Why? Because anybody can theoretically become a Roman citizen. This raises a question, though. Sorry, before we get there, I think this is worth reading. This is from the classicist Victor Davis Hanson. He puts it this way: the other in the ancient world often migrated to Hellenic and Italian cities to find economic opportunity and greater freedom. Under the Greeks, they found, on occasion, tolerance, indifference, or prosperity. Among the Romans, eventually, citizenship. This revolutionary idea of Western citizenship, replete with ever more rights and responsibilities, would provide superb manpower for the growing legions. Rome, not classical Greece, created the modern, expansive idea of Western citizenship. And that really propels Rome to mastery of the Mediterranean. But it also raises a question. If anyone can theoretically be Roman, what does it mean to be Roman? It's at a perennial problem. How do you bind together a large political community? The larger it is, the harder it is to bind together. I put up some charts. These are some numbers back from 2015, right before Brexit, on European identity. What you see in dark blue at the bottom, those are people who identify only by their nation. In light blue are people who would identify as their nation first and then European. And then in yellow and red is where the European identity would dominate the national identity. And what you pretty clearly see there is overwhelming majorities, essentially the entire populations of all European countries prefer their national identity to their European identity. Not even close. So it's very hard to bind people together as Europeans. Why? Because what does it even mean to be European? You can't dig your teeth into that. So if you're in ancient Athens, you're bound together to your literal neighbors. You also have ties of kinship, or maybe your cousin is married to somebody else's cousin, or you have close business ties. But if you're in this massive, multicultural, polyglot empire, what holds you all together? Very hard question to answer. Essentially, why would you fight for something so vast? Well, the answer needs to be both universal and eternal. It needs to be universal because it needs to be able to appeal to anyone. If anyone can be Roman, then the reason that you are Roman needs to be something that can apply to any human being. It also needs to be eternal, something worth dying for. Only two things are both universal and eternal: gods and ideas. So what's going to bind together a massive polyglot multicultural empire like the Romans? What's going to get lots of people, a Spaniard or a Jew, to buy into it? That'll be gods or ideas. Now, the Roman Republic is united together with shared religion. The Greek historian Polybius, who perhaps you read in a class, he loves sort of poking fun at the Romans for how superstitious they are. You know, he's this very erudite, urbane Greek, and he's kind of moved beyond all that superstition. But by the time you get to the Roman Empire, Rome is not that, it's not being bound together by an authentic pantheon anymore either. So what's it have to have? It has to have an idea. And that's what the movie taps into. What is Rome? A dream. Rome is an idea that can bind together potentially all human beings. Rome is a dream. Before I get to what that dream is, though, I want to first talk about the wrong answers that the movie highlights. The movie is very artfully done. So it puts the question, what is Rome, into many different characters' mouths and lets them each answer it. So Commodus, the emperor of he's going crazy, of course, in the movie. Of course he's going crazy. It's Joaquin Phoenix. He's going crazy. What is Rome? He says, what is Rome? Rome is going to be a spectacle, and I'm going to bind Rome together by devotion to me, Commodus. He's going to create a personality cult around himself. So what will bind Rome together? A cult around the emperor. I don't speak French, but I'll butcher it anyway. Louis XIV famously said, "L'État c'est moi," I am the state. So it's this idea that what is going to bind Rome together? What's going to bind this massive empire together? Devotion to one person. Hollywood loves putting this phrase in the mouth of its villains around the same time as Gladiator comes out, Star Wars. I assume they're Star Wars fans in the audience of the good Star Wars movies, not the bad Star Wars movies. I am the Senate. It's the same idea. What's going to bind this together? Me. I'm going to be the focal point, the locus point. And that's obviously the wrong answer, not just because Joaquin Phoenix has spoken it, but how on earth are you going to bind an entire empire together by just cult to one man? Interestingly, this scene is immediately succeeded. I told you it's an artfully filmed movie. It's immediately succeeded by another in which one of the heroes is asked, what is Rome? And he replies, Rome is the mob. So here, this idea of raw, direct democracy. What is Rome? It's the will of the people, as ugly as that is. But that's wrong as well, and the movie shows you why. There's a famous scene in which Maximus has just defeated the former gladiatorial champion. Y'all remember this scene? The guy is on his knees, and the entire arena is chanting, kill him, kill him, kill, kill. And Maximus spares him. So he defies the multitude, he defies the people. And the people love him for it. They start chanting Maximus the Merciful, and actually they become to respect him even more. The movie quite explicitly and visually rejects the idea that you should bow to the popular will. All right, so what is Rome? Rome's not devotion to the emperor. It's not democracy and mob rule. So what is it? Thought I'd include one clip from the film. We'll see if the sound works.
Maximus.
Y'all hear that okay? So this is Maximus talking to the Emperor Marcus Aurelius, played by Dumbledore, and he's going to ask him, what is Rome? And Maximus will give the movie's answer.
Talk. 5,000 of my men are out there in the freezing mud. 3,000 of them are bloodied and cleaved. 2,000 will never leave this place. I will not believe that they fought and died for nothing.
And what would you believe?
They fought for you. And for Rome.
What is Rome, Maximus?
I've seen much of the rest of the world. It is brutal and cruel and dark. Rome is the light.
Yet you have never been there. You have not seen what it has become. I am dying, Maximus. When a man sees his end, he wants to know there was some purpose to his life. How will the world speak my name in years to come? Will I be known as the philosopher, the warrior, the tyrant? Or will I be the emperor who gave Rome back her true self? There was once a dream that was Rome. You could only whisper it, anything more than a whisper, and it would vanish. It was so fragile. and I fear that it will not survive the winter.
Great scene, isn't it? They don't write movies like that anymore, do they? Was Gladiator 2 written like that? No. That's a beautiful scene. The first Gladiator movie gets this rap for being so violent. If you go back and rewatch it, perhaps you will after this class, there are only, I think, 4 or 5 very violent scenes in the movie. They're memorable, but there aren't that many. Most of the movie is actually dialogue like this. It's much more pensive. Anyway, beautiful scene. So what's the answer? Rome is the light. Rome is a dream. Romans replace chaos with law, with order. They replace war with peace, squalor with abundance, darkness with light. That's the dream of Rome. Order bringers, civilizers. And that's what the movie is tapping into and shows you in many times in many different ways. This was best expressed by Virgil in the Aeneid. Here's from Book 6. But Rome, 'tis thine alone with awful sway to rule mankind and make the world obey, disposing peace and war by thine own majesty to tame the proud and the fettered slave to free. Some great poetry. The movie is tapping into this vision. It's going to bring out several pieces of it. So first, war, bringing peace out of war. The film starts with a battle there against the Germanic barbarians. And unlike many battle scenes of the time, this one is filmed in a way that gives you no doubt about the inevitability of Roman victory. It begins with one of Maximus's deputies saying to him, people should know when they're conquered. And you have really no doubt that that's what's about to happen. So you often get these wide shots showing the advancing legions in nice, calm, scientific order about to plow over the barbarian hordes who are screaming, but futilely. And that contrasts with movies filmed at the time like Saving Private Ryan. Y'all seen, is this too old? Have you seen Saving Private Ryan? Okay, yes, several people have. Saving Private Ryan, that first shot of D-Day is very much a jittery camera. It shows you the point of view of that individual soldier. You're consumed by confusion. You have no idea what's going on. It never gives you a broad view of the battle. You've got no clue what's happening. You have no clues if he's going to live another minute. Gladiator's not like that. Except for one brief second, you never really doubt that Maximus is going to win. He's never in any substantial danger, except again that for that one brief second. You know the Romans are going to win, that they're going to bring order to this barbarian place. Any Lord of the Rings fans in the audience? You can put a hand up. There's got to be more than that, right? Okay, maybe a quarter of you. Helm's Deep is also being filmed at the same time. Helm's Deep does give you those wide-angle shots, but usually to invoke terror in you. You're afraid of what's going to happen. And then it cuts back and forth between the advancing orc hordes and the women and children behind the walls who are worried about what's about to happen. So you're constantly afraid. What's going to happen next? Gladiator does not make you afraid. Another nice contrast with Lord of the Rings, if you're a real Lord of the Rings nerd, the Helm's Deep scene, the music for it is done in 5/4 time, the same as Mars from Holst's Planet Suite. And he chose 5/4 because it's a very unnatural time. It unnerves you. It doesn't feel right. The music for the scene in Gladiator is a waltz. So the Romans literally waltz over the barbarians. Same thing as like the Blue Danube. All right, so they bring peace out of war. There's also this emphasis on Roman majesty. And Ridley Scott, when he makes the movie, says he wants to capture both the glory and the wickedness of Rome, recognizing that both were very much realities of the Roman time. And you get that glory in shots like this one. When you see that, something in you just is a little bit inspired. Like it's awe-inducing. Now, if you're a film studies buff, you already know what this shot is an allusion to. It's an allusion to Riefenstahl's Triumph of the Will for the Third Reich. And he works several of those in there as well. So there's something a little bit unsettling as well about this glory as it's being presented. Yet nonetheless, Ridley Scott also puts in these quite unabashed, just beautiful sunrise or sunset scenes of Rome and the Seven Hills, which are just supposed to admire and be inspired by this great, glorious civilization, especially in contrast to those screaming hordes of barbarians who are wearing skins or even less. So Rome is majestic. It's civilization. Lastly, this obviously is pure propaganda on Virgil's part. The Romans never freed the slaves en masse. But the movie is going to lean into that theme as well. It gives the very last line of the movie, as you may recall, to Juba, who says, "Now we are free." And then the credits roll. And so there is this idea that Rome's not just bringing peace, it's not just bringing civilization and glory, it's also bringing liberation. That's the dream of Rome. I began this by saying that the screenwriter and director all said this is really about America. It's not about ancient Rome. It is, again, quote, it is about our culture. So let me transition now to talking about how does this bear on modern political debates in America and Canada and elsewhere. So, Gladiator for today. Do y'all still think about the Roman Empire every day? You know what this meme is? Yeah. The first is perhaps a little bit surprising to you. Karl von Clausewitz, the great Prussian theorist of war, he wrote On War, which you may have read in another class, argued that democracy and fighting for universal ideals would tend to lead war to become absolute war, that it would drive war to be more and more violent and more extreme. And this is paradoxical because normally we associate democracy with peace. But he said, no, if you're fighting for universal ideals rather than just another chunk of territory, it's going to be no holds barred. So instead of just being a soldier who's a mercenary for a king, and why are you fighting? You're fighting because you're being paid for it. So you're never going to risk too much, because if it goes above that price of goes above your wage that week, you're like, I'm out of here. But if you're fighting for universal ideals, it's something you're willing to die for, something you're willing to go all the way for. And so democracies would tend to fight absolute wars. He predicted this back in 1830, and of course turned out to be correct. So he said, war will be total. It'll also be full of enormous amounts of money and blood and treasure spilt for it, so lots of effort. And also democracies would tend to fight for regime change. Why? Because kings could fight, here, we'll fight a war, give me a piece of territory, okay, I'm satisfied. But if you're a democracy, you're fighting for universal ideals. You will not be satisfied until the other person changes to match your ideals. So when the United States goes to war in Iraq, we don't just fight for oil. What do we fight for? We fight to topple the dictatorship and replace it with a democracy. So there's this tendency to bring ideals into war, and that actually makes war in some ways worse. We'd also, again, Clausewitz predicted this in 1830, democracies would tend to demand unconditional surrender, which of course is what we demanded in the Second World War. And the poli-sci has borne this out. I don't know if you can see that. That's a chart from Bruce Wayne de Mesquita, a scholar of international conflict. And he's showing you how much people spend per capita during World War I. The top two lines are the Brits and the French, so they spend a lot per capita. The Germans don't really catch up until 1918 when they realize, oh, they're about to lose. So they suddenly ramp up the effort, but it's too late. They've already lost. And the real autocracies, Russia and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, they never get anywhere close to investing an amount of effort in the war like the democracies do, even though they're going to lose. Why? Because they just don't have those same universal ideals to motivate their people. They can't put as much effort into the conflict as the democracies can. And until recently, the United States, of course, was pouring tons of resources into Ukraine. We had already passed the spending on Afghanistan. Why? Because it's for universal ideals. We think that something universal is at stake, which therefore justifies extreme means in its pursuit. So universal ideals will tend to make war more expensive and more deadly. And I think you see that clearly in Gladiator. It also taps into an argument, this is from the 1990s, but very relevant today as well. Which is stronger, ideas or tribes? So there's this, have y'all encountered Fukuyama and Huntington in another class, perhaps? I see some nods heads. Okay, so Fukuyama wrote this article and then this book back in the 1990s called The End of History. And the argument, I'm going to butcher his subtlety, but it's okay. The essence of this argument was mankind has reached the final stage of its political evolution, liberal democracy, which has defeated all possible rivals. Gradually, liberal democracy will spread to all corners of the earth as a universal ideal, in which way we will all be united by it, and then we will have world peace. Again, it's a subtler argument than that, but that's the essence of how people picked it up in the 90s. Opposite that was this argument of Samuel Huntington saying, no, we're not coming to the end of history, we're coming to the clash of civilizations. Why? Ideas aren't strong enough to hold people together. What holds people together? Tribes, national loyalties, religion, ethnicity. So he predicted we would go backwards in time. The first Trump administration, basically everybody who did foreign policy in the first Trump administration was a huge fan of Clash of Civilizations. All of them had read it and talked about it. Kyron Skinner, his director of policy planning, explicitly said the rivalry with China should be seen, quote, as a clash of civilizations. It very much tapped into this argument that nations, tribes are stronger than ideas. They're stronger than dreams. And Francis Fukuyama just recently was giving talks about how the deep state is actually a good thing, and that we should be united by shared global institutions and shared global values, that we should be fighting for them. So this debate, while going back to the 90s, is very much alive today. It's essentially on one team, Barack Obama, On another team, Donald Trump. Globalism versus nationalism. Universal ideas and ideas versus more local loyalties. And Gladiator's answer to this is, if you want to unite people, it has to be through a dream. Third for Gladiator today. Well, what dream would hold Canada together? I don't know enough about you, so I can't say. What dream holds America together? Europe together? China together? You have a continental, multicultural empire, country, whatever. And, Canada, I know you don't have a lot of people, but you are a continental country. You're impressive in your own right. This is terrific. You have lots of different peoples, lots of different ethnic groups that you've all bound together in this thing called Canada. This doesn't happen very often. Why have you succeeded in doing this? And Gladiator would say it's because you have some sort of dream binding people together. That's how you unite people. But are those dreams coming undone? It's no secret, of course, that Brexit had chipped away at the European dream. Other countries now are also talking about leaving the European Union. In China, China is also a multicultural empire. It solves the problem by just eliminating the differences. So the Uyghurs, if you've probably seen in the news, are a Turkic Muslim minority in China. They don't fit easily with the larger identity of the rest of China. And so what do? They're now put into concentration camps and undergoing forced sterilization. So they sort of recognize that, okay, we need a dream to unite people. There's no dream uniting China. Thanks, Jeff. So what do? They get rid of the problem actors. They eliminate the problem rather than try to articulate something that can unite people together. America right now in my own country is going through the same thing. Well, what dream unites Americans? It's a hard question to answer. But if you want things to hold together, Gladiator would suggest you have to find that dream. The movie ends with that beautiful scene of Lucilla asking, is Rome worth one good man's life? We believed it once. Make us believe it again. And then they carry Maximus out of the arena, and you get these lovely shots of the Roman hills, and there's this implication that the Roman Republic has been reestablished, just like Marcus Aurelius had hoped. Is Rome worth one good man's life? Yes, make us believe in this dream we all once shared, and we all want to believe it. But of course, in reality, the Roman Republic didn't come back. In reality, once Commodus gets killed, it's followed by a civil war. There are 5 emperors in a very short period of time. It's very bloody. At last, Septimius Severus, he's an emperor from North Africa, reestablishes control of the empire and reestablishes the dictatorship. Rome never gets to be a republic again. And that kind of sheds a little bit of doubt on Gladiator's message. If you really need this dream, but this dream didn't succeed in Rome, can it succeed again in our own context? And Scott and Franzoni and the other screenwriters are trying to say yes, that you can sort of resurrect this dream to unite people. But is it Rome that really inspires us about Gladiator? When you watch Gladiator, I mean, you got to love those beautiful shots of Rome. But what really inspires you about Gladiator, I suspect, is Maximus. My wife would say Russell Crowe. What really inspires you is Maximus, is his willingness to sacrifice, his devotion to his family and his fields. And if that's true, if it's not really Rome that's so inspiring, if it's Maximus, then perhaps we should say not that it's the dream of Rome that was worth dying for, but rather instead, perhaps, just perhaps, that for a good man, someone might be willing to die. And that's what really united people together. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take your questions.